Worldview was a byproduct of Florence's Niccolò Machiavelli, who lived from 1469 to 1527. A man who had had a huge influence on their world, a man who has had a huge influence on our world today still. Machiavelli was influenced by Aristotle, Erasmus, Da Vinci, all giants. And he in turn influenced men like Hobbes and Rousseau and Bacon and Nietzsche, all giants in their own rights. He also influenced Hitler and Stalin, possibly the French Revolution, and Henry VIII. He's an important guy. Machiavelli was empirical in his approach. He is recognized by many as the father of modern political science and philosophy. He wrote of the idea of power by any means necessary, cunningness and manipulation. And I don't want to get too far from our storyline, but I think that Guy Chet's reference to Machiavelli, who we'll read in a few minutes, in regards to how the English thought and interacted was really good. It was keen. How he was a driver in their philosophy and worldview. And I want to develop him just a little bit from two directions that will help to shape and frame the story in a way that's easier to wrap your brain around. Well, it's easier for me to wrap my brain around because everything in our world is connected one way or another, no matter where we land on the chronological, data point of history. Something happened before it and something happened after it. And one way or another, there's like this chain of, linked events. So once I get where people are coming from and what their motivation was, oftentimes their actions are far more understandable. And that's very often the difference between communicating and connecting, understanding where someone is coming from. Incidentally, understanding is not synonymous with justifying. I've made several disparaging remarks and several monologues about how the Puritans behaved at times. But a brief look at Machiavelli may help to explain a few things from their time to ours. Okay, I said two quick angles. It's almost unfair to attempt to qualify Niccolò Machiavelli in just a few paragraphs, but I'm going to do it anyways, so here we go. As pertaining to the English Colonials in New England in 1637, there were two works by Machiavelli, two books that had a massive influence on all of Europe. One was political in nature, The Prince, and one was more of a military philosophy, The Art of War. Machiavelli was a statesman in his day, until the Medicis took over Florence and expelled him. And after this, he wrote about power, those who have it, how they get it, how they keep it. Often, the world is not as we see it. It's not as we perceive it to be. And Machiavelli understood this. He studied men that were in power, men that held power. The idea that the best of leaders must be noble and good was, and still is, popular. Machiavelli believed that princes should always seem to be very moral, even if they're not. He wrote in a time when the virtues of nobility were celebrated. We do that today with our politicians, don't we? With our leaders and politicians. We want to hold them up on a pedestal. We want them to be squeaky clean. We want to think that everything that they've done is above board and they're always looking out for everybody's best interest. But what Machiavelli had seen was that the effective and successful rulers had to be, quote, brutal, calculating, and when necessary, immoral, end quote. How do you like that? He wrote, quote, because people are quick to change their nature when they imagine they can improve their lot, a leader must always be shrewd, end quote. He also said, quote, the fact is that a man who wants to act virtuously in every way necessarily comes to grief among so many who are not virtuous. Therefore, if a prince wants to maintain his rule, he must be prepared not to be virtuous, and to make use of this or not according to need, end quote. So what he's really saying is, if you think you're always going to be as pure as the driven snow, and you're put into a position of power, you're bringing misery upon yourself. I'm not telling you to be lacking in virtue, but I am telling you that you ought to be prepared to act accordingly to any situation. And sometimes your morals and your virtues may go out the window. Machiavelli believed it's better to be feared than loved if you have to choose between the two. To keep order and power, he argued for cruelty over kindness, saying, quote, making an example of one or two offenders is kinder than being too compassionate and allowing disorders to develop into murder and chaos, which affects the whole community.